Hi there, it's Kevin with Rogue Deck Builder here with the Friday Night Magic Pioneer Primer. This week I'm going to be playing Soulflayer. This has been a deck that's been around for a while in Pioneer, had some decent finishes, but I'm going to add it with its little brother from March of the Machine's Aftermath, the Urborg Scavengers. So these two cards work very similar together, but one of the problems with Soulflayer is if you didn't happen to draw Soulflayer, you just had a bunch of clunky cards. So I'm thinking having 8 versions of basically the same card. I admit Urborg Scavenger is a little bit weaker, but has a potential of becoming stronger than Soulflayer, and has the ability of also, you can just cast an Urborg Scavenger and just exile one card from your graveyard and feel okay about it if you can then the next turn exile another card that you then pitch. So there are some trade-offs with Urborg Scavenger versus Soulflayer, but this brew is in its first edition, so I'm not going to make a shiny video for this. I'm just going to showcase what I've got going in my first iteration, and as time goes on and we play some matchups, I think I'll be able to tune this to a better deck. But again, I think that the addition to Urborg Scavengers is very, very spicy for this archetype because it does add more of the same, in this case, exactly what you're looking for with Soulflayer, exiling something that has very relevant abilities, and your opponent's not being able to deal with things like Hexproof and Indestructible. So, before you is the deck list. We'll just go down card by card. So the first one, the Soulflayer, is the 6-mana Delve. So ideally, you just want to be casting this for 2 black. And if it delves a creature, you exile a creature with its delve ability. It with first strike, double strike, death touch, haste, hexproof, indestructible, lifelink, reach, trample, and vigilance. It gains those abilities. So ideally, you want a Zetalpa in the bin. So Zetalpa is this beautiful elder dinosaur that has flying, double strike, vigilance, trample, and indestructible. And that way it will be imprinted on the Soulflayer. And then you also want something like hexproof, like the Striped Riverwinder. Some decks have used Chromanticore, but I think if you're going to go the Chromantiflayer build, you want to go into a 5-color list. You do have some cool things you can do. I might be brewing a deck with that as well because Atraxa is looking very, very spicy with Soulflayer, but that is a deck list for another day. So keeping this in just a 2-color Dimir and not really worrying about like having the upsides of being able to splice on a Chromanticore into something else, I think that we don't want to be running it in this particular list. So the Striped Riverwinder and Zetalpa are the 2 key targets that you absolutely want to be Soulflaring away. But the Urborg Scavengers, it utilizes haste a lot better than Soulflayer. I mean, of course Soulflayer wants haste, but it's just not quite the priority. The Indestructible and Hexproof is the priority, and then your opponent has to somehow deal with a 4/4 at that point double strike. Double strike, indestructible, hexproof. Very, very tough for many decks to deal with at that point. The Scavengers, however, it wants haste because you want to be exiling 2 cards per turn, or 2 cards the first time it comes out, so it can get a little bit bigger, so it can actually be a Soulflayer. So when Urborg Scavengers enters the battlefield or attacks, you exile a card from your graveyard, and then you put a +1/+1 counter on Urborg Scavengers, and then it has all the abilities like flying, death touch, haste, and whatnot, the same thing as Soulflayer. So with this one, you want to get something, you want to have a haste creature in the graveyard. So Samut is super strong for this particular ability because it does have vigilance, haste, double strike. Flash, don't worry about that, but the double strike, vigilance, haste on the Scavengers, and the same thing the Adult Gold Dragon with flying, lifelink, and haste. Hopefully you can give it a little bit of evasion so then it can attack in and then exile something like a Striped Riverwinder or a Zetalpa Primal Dawn. So that's kind of the key of the deck. You want a lot of creatures, you want them in the graveyard. I am going to be running a Nightveil Predator. It seems pretty good too with flying, death touch, hexproof. So in this one we have 4 ways to get indestructible, 6 ways to get death or hexproof, and there's a lot of keywords on the Nightveil Predator. I also do have like a Nighthawk Scavenger in here because flying, death touch, lifelink is also a really good ability to be hooked up with something like the double strike on Zetalpa, or that way death touch. I mean, you have Indestructible at that point too, so it might be a little bit overkill, but I think it's definitely relevant. There are a few other cards I thought in this, like I believe Kefnet has indestructible and flying, and I thought about, okay, well, Kefnet could go in this deck, and if you do happen to have 7 cards in your hand, it can attack and block. That could be a good little card. So again, this is just in the first iteration of this deck. I'm not sure exact numbers it will end up doing. I kind of just copy-pasted some various deck lists that they ran similar, shells as the Soulflayer of what I'm looking for, of just going in this Dimir. And so the other creature we're going to be running in this deck is going to be the Ledger Shredder. I think the Ledger Shredder is super good in this deck because it utilizes a lot lot of the spells that we're going to be casting to help surveil. And it's another creature that just can get out of control really quickly. Typically, opponents are going to run out a lot of like fatal pushes and removal on the Ledger Shredder, which means that our Soulflayers and our Urborg Scavengers can hopefully come into play and not be interacted with until they can get their hexproof and indestructible. Like Soulflayer is a little bit better because I believe it comes in with those abilities, and Urborg Scavenger still has to exile them as part of the gaining those abilities. So a little bit weaker of a card right there for that little interaction with the Urborg Scavenger and Soulflayer. Speaking of the Scavengers, though, this is another card that I'm very interested in Standard. There seems to be a lot of cards that work with the Urborg Scavengers, with March of Machines having so many of those partner legendary creatures that have. I was looking like Gitrog and Thalia had like a word salad of keyword stuff on it, and then you even have like really good cards by themselves, like Glissa that has First Strike and Death Touch. And so if a Glissa happens to die, then you follow it up with an Urborg Scavenger, you still have another First Strike, Death Touch, or 3/3 that continues to get bigger and bigger. So this is an interesting card in Standard, but that will be another video for another day, again, as I ramble on. The other cards I'm going to be running in this one is going to be trying to fill up the graveyard as quickly as possible. Considers are good. Look at the top card of the library, put it in your graveyard if you want, draw a card. Then we have the Otherworldly Gaze, which really sets up our combo, has a really good synergies as well with like the Ledger Shredder, because you can go Ledger Shredder, then go Otherworldly Gaze twice in a turn, put up to 6 cards in your graveyard, and with Ledger Shredder you're also going to be conniving, and so therefore it's going to be possibly even putting more cards in your bin and getting a bigger Ledger Shredder. The other spells I'm going to be running, this is going to be 4 Tainted Indulgences, which allows you to draw 2 cards and then discard a card unless you have 5 more mana values. In this deck, it's actually very easy to get 5 mana values in here. You have 4 drops, 3 drops, 2 drops, 1 drops. You have everything, all the way up to 8. So 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's very easy for Tainted Indulgence just to be a draw 2 card, which is pretty good with this deck. And I'm running a 1-of chart, of course, to round out the deck, because this deck is not very greedy on lands. You can actually get away with running just 19 lands because you only have to get up to 3 mana with the Urborg Scavengers, and a lot of these considers and gazes, you don't want to be throwing away the lands. Same with the Tainted Indulgence, you're throwing away a creature and keeping the lands, and so you're going to be cantripping into lands quite easily. The mana base is pretty much straightforward. It's just going to be the best mana available right now in the Pioneer format. We're going to be running the 4 Watery Graves, the 4 Darkslick Shores, and 1 of Underground River, and the Pathways. Very easy just to fix in this one. Running 2 basic islands, 2 basic swamps, the Otawara Soaring City, and the Takenuma Abandoned Mire. Both those have utilities, and might as well run them. Sideboard is really up to your meta. This one's kind of a boring sideboard because I'm just using the usual suspects here. In the matchups for Fatal Push is good, it's great. So 4 Fatal Pushes, 4 Thoughtseizes, 2 Spell Pierces, 2 Unmoored Ego. This is a very underrated card in Pioneer. There are so many one-trick pony decks that you can just rip out something and then they really can't function with those one-trick pony combo decks. We're going to run 2 Spell Pierces just to help us cast our Soulflayers if we need to. Same thing goes with the Mystical Dispute. It's a very versatile card. And then 2 Collective Brutalities, because it's one of those decks too where discarding a card is actually good. And so being able to pair this with like Thoughtseize and then Collective Brutality, you can really dig out or you can really disrupt your opponent and shut down any sort of aggression they might be having with Collective Brutality and pitch a card at the same time. So very, very good card with Collective Brutality, a lot of synergy with this deck. So again, this is just the very first iteration of this deck. I'll have the link in the description below, and you can look at my list, and I'm going to be playing it tomorrow at our FNM for Pioneer, and I'll let you know how well it goes and what matchups it did good against and what matchups it did not. And I think that after this, we'll be able to set up a nice little list with the Soulflayer. Again, this isn't really too special. A lot of these lists have existed before with Soulflayer. Sometimes it's really good in the meta, especially when aggro is strong, because it's very difficult for people to deal with like a Soulflayer that has lifelink and indestructible attached to it and vigilance and start swinging in at that point. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement too with other lists that go maybe more into the Chromanticore or into like Atraxa. Soulflayer and Atraxa in Neoform just seems like the boss right now. I'm surprised people haven't tried that yet. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, I'll let you know how it goes. This has been Kevin with Rogue Deck Builder. Thanks for watching.